So in the midst of this multifaceted situation that I've just explained to you, we have a persistent problem that pops up. And you can think about whether this happens in your schools or not. And so how many of you have heard the term disproportionality or disproportionate representation? Okay, so basically what we have is we have culturally and linguistically students who have been historically over-identified as having disabilities, particularly in the high incidence categories, but we also have some cultural and linguistic groups who have been under-identified in various categories of disabilities. So again, another set of nuanced circumstances. We call it disproportionality because it's not just over-representation, we also have under-representation. So let's talk about what that means. So if you think of the cultural and linguistic groups and think of that pie graph of, the demographics that I showed you. In every state we can have a pie graph, or in every district we could have a pie graph of what is the proportion of these different racial and ethnic groups in our district or in our state. And then look at our special ed population, and you would expect those proportions to match up pretty much. So if we have, 6% of our students who are of Asian or Pacific Island background, I think that's the federal term, then we would expect in the category of autism, say, to have about 6% of our students from that, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. If we have about, I'll just be broad for a second, not specific. If we have about 6% of our population in our district identified as having disabilities, period, then we would expect about 6% of our Hispanic population to have disabilities, about 6% of our African American population to have disabilities, etc. Then you can break that down by category and by ethnic group. But what we find is overrepresentation of some groups, particularly Hispanic, and African American students are overrepresented in the high incidence categories of learning disabilities and behavior disorders and higher functioning intellectual development. And we often see underrepresentation of Asian American students in those groups. And then, you can break it down. So anyway, why does this happen? There are lots of theories about it. There's a lot of research about it. But basically, it boils down to inaccuracy in the identification process. So we have imperfections in the ways that we refer and assess students for special education, and our students who are English language learners get caught in this tangled web of referral and assessment and identification, and often they're experiencing difficulties, and we have well-meaning but frustrated educators who want to help them, and special education seems like the best option. And then we have imperfect tests and people who operate the tests and run our processes who maybe are misinformed or don't quite understand some of the nuances of second language learning, who will say, well, yes, we have, the student qualifies, but really it's not a disability issue.